Although diagnostics can give you some great insight into what is happening inside an application, sometimes you need to get even deeper into an app to see what's happening. Of course, you can always step through code and inspect variables using the debugger in your favorite browser's developer tools, but I want to show you a few techniques specific to Angular that work at this level. First up are some tools. Angular Batarang is a tool that installs as a Chrome extension, and you can use it to inspect the scope objects in an application and see all of your model data. You'll just need to do a search for AngularJS Batarang. That should bring you to chrome.google.com, the web store. And if you haven't installed Batarang as yet, there will be a button in the upper right that you can click to install this. And once it's installed, and you're on a page that's using Angular, just open up your browser's developer tools, the Chrome developer tools, and there will be a new tab, AngularJS. You'll want to enable Batarang and then you can inspect the scopes. Unfortunately, as I'm recording this, a new version of Batarang was just released. It's a version that has been rewritten from the ground up, and it's more than just a little bit flaky. But if you want to give this tool a try, you can install it from the Chrome Web Store. Another tool is ng Inspector. This one will plug into Chrome or Safari. Just go to ng-inspector.org, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll be able to find your download links. With ng Inspector, you can go to a page using Angular, and you can click on the ng Inspector icon that should appear up in your toolbar. And again, the idea is the same. You should be able to inspect the active scopes that are in your application. When you select one, here I can see that the error-prone controller is the controller associated with the scope, and it's also associated with the highlighted portion of the DOM. I can drill into it and see my alert types, my current alert message that will update as I type into something that is bound to that piece of the model. And both of these tools are useful for getting some insight into what your Angular application is doing, but I wanted to show you some things that you can do just from the console, some interactive things that are often quite easy to do and can give you some valuable insight. First of all, since the console represents a window into the current state of the runtime, I have access to the same globals that my application would have access to, like Angular. And that means I also have access to angular.element, which would allow me to go out and wrap things like the document element, or go out and search for an element by ID or CSS selector, and then start manipulating that element with the API that Angular provides. Now here's a tip for Chrome. If you go out and inspect a specific element inside the list of elements here, that last element that you have selected will be available as $0. So if I create a variable that is angular.element on $0, element now points to my div that error-prone controller is in charge of, and it is wrapped with the Angular API. And that means I can do things like ask this element for its current scope, which means I can drill into the model that is associated with this, and I can inspect the variables here. I can also ask for the controller that is associated with this element just by saying element.controller. And you'll see those two are the same thing since we're using controller as syntax. And let me save a few things off. I want to say scope equals element.scope. And then I want to say element.controller.create exception. Now that throws the expected exception, but you might be wondering why that's not showing up on the screen, and there's a couple good reasons for that. Since we have called this method directly, Angular is not in control of the execution of create exception. Therefore, Angular wasn't able to catch that particular exception. And that's the one thing you have to be careful with in the console. There's a few scenarios where you can actually go in and interactively manipulate your controllers, your models, even your services, which can be very useful for figuring out how they're behaving. But if you want changes to the model to actually be reflected on the screen, you're going to have to do things like scope.apply and execute your bit of code inside of a function. So now I can say element.controller.create exception, and now I get something onto the screen. I can even ask this element for the injector, the IOC container that is in charge of this application, and I can get a reference to any service this way. So I could say that the alerting service is element.injector. Please get me the alerting service. And now I could say alerting. let's add a danger alert or an info alert. And that will be added to the current alert, but again, the DOM isn't updating, and that's because Angular's not running the digest phase. It didn't know that this bit of code is executed. It hasn't detected any changes in the model. So once again, an easy solution to that problem would be to execute that same code inside of an apply. So I can say alerting.addInfo test, and now that appears on the screen. And this has been a really instructive way for me to learn some things in Angular, to be able to interactively explore services and just work with them from the console to see how they behave.